Dear members of Black Horror Stories, today we are sharing a deeply personal experience from Mrs. R. This story was shared with us via email and is a true account of her life. We feel it's important to note that this story contains elements of suicide and disturbing events. If you are sensitive to such topics, we advise caution in continuing. We also ask for your full attention until the end, as Mrs. R is seeking feedback on whether she made the right choices in her journey. So please feel free to share them in the comments section below. My name is Andrea, fictional name, and this story is about love. A love I was unaware harbored a devil in its depths. I met my ex-partner, whom I'll refer to as Jeremy, fictional name, in a peculiar way. Looking back now, I can't fathom why I chose to start a relationship with him. I deeply regret not walking away and never getting involved with him. But let me tell you how I met Jeremy. He used to visit my neighbors frequently. He also lived in the same street as me, a bit further down. He bore a striking resemblance to my ex-brother-in-law. I assumed he might be related to him, so one day I stopped by his place. I saw Jeremy working in the yard, tending to the garden or cleaning. I asked him if he knew my ex-brother-in-law. He looked surprised and replied, "No, I don't know him." "Okay, then I'll leave you be," I said, and hopped back on my bike to leave. The next moment, I was grabbed from behind and dragged into his house. I screamed and struggled, but there were very few neighbors around at that time. It was mostly woods and a secluded dirt road. He dragged me to his bed, violently pulled my pants off, and raped me like a beast. I threatened to tell my parents what he had done, but then I saw him nervously twisting a ring on one of his fingers, as if contemplating what to do next. Then he held me tightly and said, "No, don't tell them anything. I want to be with you. I want a relationship with you." I was in tears. He started nervously fidgeting with his ring again, as if unsure of what to do with me himself. I don't know what possessed me, but I agreed to be his girlfriend. That's how our relationship began. It was a difficult relationship full of abuse and punishments, but somehow, I loved my husband deeply, and I never thought about leaving him once. After a few years, we had our first child together. Our child fell sick often, and Jeremy suggested seeking help from an old gentleman he knew well. He said, "This gentleman had helped me in the past when I had a problem, and he gave me this ring for protection. I can do a lot with this ring." He then proceeded to tell me in detail what he could do with that ring, but I was incredibly naive, and my focus was on my sick child. Whatever he told me about his ring didn't stick with me. I just wanted healing for my child, so I agreed to accompany him to see that old man. This gentleman informed us that my child was sick because he had liver disease. He took a broomstick and a saucer, placed the handle of the broomstick against my child's navel, and made sweeping motions. You wouldn't believe it, but blood with mucus came out of the navel. I thought, wow, that's really intense. After performing this ritual, we were allowed to go home. "Come back in a week to get medicine for the child," said the old man. As he had instructed, we returned a week later. This time, things were different. The man went inside his house alone with Jeremy. They both told me to wait outside. After a while, they emerged, and I was called inside. The man told me that I needed to be cleansed too if I truly wanted my child to get better. Again, I agreed with what they said. do anything if my child would be healthy. He took a shallow white basin filled with water and instructed me to place my hand in it. I investigated the basin and saw nothing but the bottom. I placed my hand in it, and the man started chanting. Suddenly, I felt sharp teeth biting into the palm of my hand from the bottom of the basin. I recoiled in shock and pulled my hand out. But when I looked at my palm, there was nothing there. No blood. Nothing. The man asked, "What's wrong?" I said, "I was bitten by something with sharp teeth." He said, "No, there's nothing in the basin, as you've seen for yourself. Put your hand back in." Well, foolish me. I put my hand back in. Once again, I felt razor-sharp teeth biting into my palm. I quickly withdrew my hand in a reflex motion. The man said, "It's okay." I found it strange, but after that, he was done with his ritual, or whatever it was, so we were allowed to go home. Thankfully, my son did get better after some time, so I didn't dwell on the visit to the old J-man and the incident with the sharp teeth in the basin. Years passed, and we faced financial problems because Jeremy had a gambling addiction. There were days when I had nothing to cook except rice, and I made do with that. I didn't receive any money, and when I did get money from Jeremy, it was to pay off our car. I had to set aside that little money and couldn't buy anything else for our family. One day, we had a huge argument, and he hit me. Since then, he has hit me several times. We argued more frequently, and I kicked him out more often, but he always returned as if nothing had happened. We never got married. He asked me to marry him many times, but I always refused. Deep down, I didn't want to marry someone who gave me such a life. I deserved better, but I didn't know why I stayed with him and endured all these hardships. He always forced me to ask my father to transfer all the assets into my name. I found this extremely unpleasant, as it made me seem greedy and money hungry, when it was Jeremy who was eyeing my father's possessions like a vulture. Jeremy had never been ambitious himself. He always wanted a different car. So, we always had car debts. Year after year, the same old story. And his gambling addiction continued to cause problems. I also found out that he was chatting and flirting with other girls. Over the years, I collected enough evidence of this. I even caught him once, waiting for a woman outside a shop on the corner. He was so engrossed in his phone that he didn't even notice me watching him. I called him and asked him where he was and when he would come home. He casually told me that he had some business to take care of and wouldn't be home for a while. As he said that, I watched him from a distance. I was so damn angry. Liar that he is. Anyway, shortly after that, I approached him, confronted him with his lies, and went home. He came home and said I was crazy and making things up. Really a narcissist? He would cause trouble and then blame me for being crazy. After that, I caught him 2 more times in the same manner, waiting for another girl. Meanwhile, our relationship had lasted for 20 years, and more kids had come along, but our life didn't get any better. I kept tabs on Jeremy's actions because I knew he was cheating on me and lying about everything. I collected evidence of his conversations with other women online. One day, he said something that triggered me, and I got angry. In my fury, I screamed at him that I knew everything he was up to. I launched into him in my rage, and we got into a fight. He then packed his things and left on his own. After some time, he called me again and wanted to be with me again. I told him I had enough and didn't want him in my house anymore. But he managed to manipulate me with flattery and sweet words, so we kept in touch. After a while, I met a gentleman named Wendell. He became my new boyfriend. This sparked jealousy in Jeremy. Even though we had nothing to do with each other anymore, he was still incredibly intrusive and tried hard to stay in my life. I loved Wendell very much, but at the same time, I was still having sexual relations with Jeremy, secretly meeting in various hotels. Of course, Wendell knew nothing about this. I don't know why I kept allowing it, despite all the pain and suffering Jeremy had caused me over the years, allowing him to walk back into my life whenever he pleased. I often felt like a doormat because I kept accepting him back into my life despite everything he did to me. I didn't understand myself anymore. The decisions I made to forgive this man time and time again and continue the relationship. But anyway, I had to buy the car I drove from Jeremy. He wanted to be paid for it, so I paid him for it. Despite us still having sex regularly, I still had to pay for that car. Jeremy was always the one who changed the oil for my car. What I didn't know was that he hadn't screwed the oil cap of the oil reservoir, located at the bottom of the car engine, tightly shut, causing oil to leak out every day. As a result, my car's engine got stuck because the cap had come loose due to the vibrations from driving. Jeremy offered to help me fix all this, but he wanted to be with me again in exchange. Strangely enough, he had no problem with me meeting another man to whom I had given my heart. He said, "Yes, I love you, so I still want to be in a relationship with you. Maybe we don't live together, but I still want to be with you, even though you have someone else." Time passed. Wendell and I ultimately didn't work out. Our relationship fell apart. So, Jeremy crept back into my life, and we were in a relationship again. It was an on-off, flickering relationship with Jeremy. That's how we were with each other. It was truly exhausting. I always had every intention of ending the relationship, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I really wish I had just done it, because this contact with Jeremy was not healthy for me. He once told me, "If you can't be mine, no one will have you. I'll kill you, and you should know that." An obvious threat, I was terrified of him, and I gradually realized that I could expect anything from him. He was aggressive, unpredictable, cunning, and he didn't hesitate to use violence. He could make me disappear one day, and that was my biggest fear. So, I tried to cooperate as much as possible to avoid angering him. He had to have me as his girlfriend, even if it had to happen with violence. Whether I was happy or not, it didn't matter to him because my feelings didn't count. I was very unhappy with this man in my life, so much so that I attempted suicide several times with medication, and another time by cutting my wrists with a razor blade. Fortunately, I was discovered in time, so I can tell this story now. As a result, I received treatment from a psychiatrist. I could pour my heart out and cry as much as I wanted to with the psychiatrist. When I left the psychiatrist's office, I felt relieved because I was really heard and taken seriously there. I was under treatment there for almost 2 years. I had postnatal depression during my last pregnancy. But Jeremy, as always, didn't seem to care at all. He was blind to my suffering. I was regularly beaten by him. He would choke me, press me to the ground, and start beating me. He hit me in the face, and head with his fist with all his power. I once got a blood clot in my brain because of a massive blow Jeremy gave me to my head. I fell hard on the back of my head. I've experienced so much aggression from him that I could write a book about it. I still can't talk about some of these events now because of their seriousness, sensitivity, and painful nature. Anyway, I tried to carry on with my life as best as I could, both the good and the bad. I stayed strong for my children. I was forced to buy another car from someone because I needed transportation. Of course, I did this on installment because I didn't have that much money. And when I had to pay off the last part, Jeremy gave that money to the gentleman. The gentleman called me and said my car was already paid off. I said, No, give Jeremy his money back. I don't want his money. I can pay for my car myself. The gentleman gave the money back, and I paid off the last part of my vehicle myself. One day, I honestly told Jeremy, I'm tired of this on and off relationship. It's not healthy for either of us. I don't want to be with you anymore. I don't love you anymore. My feelings are gone. Let's finally stop this. He got angry. He asked, Why don't you think about our children? You only think about yourself and not about the children? As always, he shifted the blame onto me. According to him, it was my fault. Is it healthy to argue every day for the children? I asked him. He couldn't say anything to that. All he wanted was for me to stay with him, whether it was healthy for us as a family or not. But I really didn't want to continue, and I demanded that he leave the house. After throwing dishes and after breaking a lamp, he left the house. Around this time, I began having dreams of being chased by large black shadows. One day, Jeremy jumped over my fence and then loosened the oil cap on the bottom of my car engine, and then he removed all the oil from it. He collected all the oil and poured it into my drainage, so I didn't notice it. He also placed a large roofing nail in my rear left tire. The next day, he called me and said, I have a strong feeling that something is going to happen to you, to which I replied, If you don't do anything to me, nothing will happen to me. Well, people, my car almost got wrecked, and I almost got into a serious accident. I kept getting expenses because of these low tricks of his. He wanted to thwart me in every possible way if I didn't take him back. He was like a demon on me. He came up with the strangest things to torment me and get on my nerves. He called again after a few days and said, I want all the household items back because I bought them back then. Mind you, our children still lived with me, and they also used all those items, but he didn't care at all, and he wanted everything back. He casually showed up with a pickup truck and took everything away. I was left with my kids in an empty house. He didn't think about how the children would eat because he also took the gas stove and the gas tank. Literally everything. He came again in the evening hours, and this time he cut the brake cables of my car. I don't know if he thought about the fact that I dropped off and picked up our children from school every day. If something happened to me, there was a good chance that something would happen to our children too, because they were almost always with me in the car. But he didn't care about that either. We kept arguing because at one point, he also wanted to take my children away from me by inciting them against me. He said the meanest things to them about me. It still baffles me how heartless and mean a person can be, because I have always been a good mother to my children. I may have had a hard life with Jeremy, but I never let my children suffer because of it. I always did my best to take care of them and shield them from all the problems I had with their father. My children were my pride and joy, and the only reason I was still alive. So, Jeremy inciting my children against me hurt me a lot and bothered me. I didn't want my children to think badly of me and believe their father's lies. Conversely, I never told them anything bad about their father, despite all he had done to me. Around this time, the atmosphere in our house became worse. All the food in our house started to spoil very quickly. Sometimes, I just cooked rice. But shortly after, it had already soured in the rice cooker, which had never happened before. I bought different types of rice, and the same thing happened repeatedly. I was desperate. There was something seriously wrong in my house. One of my sons saw shadows of a man in our house more often. He even ran away from home because he was afraid in our house. My other sons started to be aggressive and disrespectful towards me. Jeremy started to stalk me, so I had to file a restraining order with the court, and I did. I got very sick. I couldn't work. I went from one doctor to another. No doctor found anything wrong with me. Tests showed nothing, and yet I was sick. During this time, my car was also constantly breaking down. I had to go to the mechanic for repairs every time. In a few months, I had several accidents in traffic. Jeremy was always busy with me. He couldn't accept that I didn't want him anymore. He literally worked overtime to make my life unbearable. So, he took all the items from the house, then ruined my car, and then made me very sick so that I couldn't work. He wanted me to appear begging at his door and take him back. He called me once and said, "I'm going to break you to the ground. You'll see." I laughed at him and said, "Goodwill always prevail. You forget that there is a God." I received help unexpectedly from an unexpected source. I was referred by an acquaintance to someone who could help me. I visited the designated person for assistance, and miraculously, I began to heal bit by bit. My rice no longer soured. My relationship with my children improved. I stopped having accidents. I no longer experienced car troubles. My household appliances stopped breaking down one after another. So people, what I learned from the person who helped me is that Jeremy had bound me years ago. I asked, "Bound? What do you mean? How could someone bind me?" The person then said to me, "Yes, you were spiritually bound. Tonight, in your sleep, you will see where your ex brought you to bind you spiritually, and you will receive all the answers you seek." Followers of Black horror stories, I had forgotten all about it. But suddenly, I saw everything in my dreams, playing out as if I were reliving the visit to that old man, where I had to place my hand in that white container. That was the moment when I was spiritually bound and effectively became subservient to Jeremy. He had arranged this with that Javanese man. Now it all made sense why, despite all the setbacks and mistreatment, I kept going back to Jeremy and accepted everything he did. At the time, I didn't understand because I have no knowledge of black magic, voodoo, and paranormal stuff. Even if I had understood, I would have refused to believe it. I was spiritually bound, or in simpler terms, hexed. So I wasn't functioning normally. I was always confused and submissive to Jeremy. His will was law. I fought against it, of course, but it was futile because the dark forces ensured it. No wonder my life was filled with misery and chaos. Those demonic powers ensured my mental breakdown and exhaustion, keeping me manageable. person I sought help from, who freed me, said, "One bite you received in the white container counted for 10 years of being bound to Jeremy. You were bitten twice on your hand, meaning you were bound to Jeremy for 20 years. I had been hexed by the father of my children for 20 long years. And after those 20 years, Jeremy was supposed to bring me back to that old Javanese man to reactivate the voodoo, but unfortunately, the man had already passed away, so he couldn't bring me back. That's why I slowly began to awaken from the hex he had cast upon me. Jeremy went to another voodoo priest to send all sorts of demons my way. I experienced terrible things because of this man, but good always triumphs over evil. So thankfully, I found cultural help to rid myself of all the demonic powers that had been unleashed upon me. My children are doing well now. I take care of them alone because Jeremy doesn't care about them. He keeps posting pathetic messages on social media about missing his children, but it's all nonsense and attention-seeking because he does nothing for them. If he really wanted to see them, he could have picked them up and done something fun with them. People who don't know him will believe his sweet talk and feel sorry for him. My 3 sons are now 10, 18, and 21 years old, and as a single mother, it's incredibly difficult for me to make ends meet in these expensive times. But I do my utmost to take care of my children and ensure they lack nothing. Fortunately, when I can't afford something, they understand. I'm so grateful to have such well-behaved, understanding children. The only thing I would have wanted differently is to have had them with someone else, because their father is the devil himself. I no longer need anything from Jeremy. He has caused me enough misery. He can stay far away from me now, and I want nothing to do with him. I later found out that Jeremy's ring, in the form of a snake around his finger, truly possessed certain powers, allowing him to control me and make me do whatever he wanted. He had told me about that ring at the beginning of our relationship, saying it could make him do strange things. But because my child was sick at the time, I didn't really listen to him. Honestly, I thought it was nonsense he was spouting. Maybe he just wanted to impress me. If only I had listened better back then, maybe everything would have turned out differently. But maybe not, because I was already partially under his control. Because if he could rape me, and I still stayed with him, that says enough that I wasn't in my right mind. He mustn't forget that anyone who works with demonic forces will sooner or later have to pay the price. My question to you is what I can do to forget about Jeremy, because as soon as I talk to another man, I get an enormous fear over me. And when I see certain jewelry, which is normal in our culture, I get shivers down my body. Should I go to a voodoo priest myself to forget about him? Should I get hypnotized? Should I go to church? I am desperate because I cannot fully pick up my life. Please let me know in the comments. I'm watching.